Flight 2187 shudders violently at 36,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean. Captain Marcus Reynolds stumbles into the cabin, face ashen and sweating profusely. "Both pilots are down. Does anyone have ANY flying experience?" he shouts desperately. Jasmine Washington in seat 12B slowly removes her headphones, ignoring the judgmental stares. Before we dive into this incredible true story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. If you enjoy real-life stories of unexpected heroes, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Now, let's see how this mid-air emergency unfolds. Jasmine Washington's morning had started like any other day with high stakes. Her alarm blared at 4:30 a.m., giving her just enough time to review her presentation one final time before heading to LaGuardia Airport. The interview with Pinnacle Aeronautics in New York represented everything she'd been working toward since leaving the Air Force, a chance to use her engineering expertise in aircraft design rather than just flying them. After 15 years as an Air Force pilot, Major Jasmine Washington had an impeccable record. She'd flown combat missions over Afghanistan, led complex rescue operations in hostile territory, and trained dozens of new pilots. Her technical knowledge of aircraft systems was unmatched in her squadron. Yet when promotion time came, she watched as less experienced white male officers moved up while she remained stagnant. "Your performance is exemplary, Washington," her commanding officer had said during her last review. "But we're looking for a certain leadership quality that's difficult to quantify." That unquantifiable quality somehow always seemed to manifest in her white colleagues, but remained elusive in her evaluations. The final straw came when Lieutenant Colonel Derek Peterson, whom she had personally trained, was promoted above her. She submitted her resignation the following day. 15 years of dedicated service ended with a handshake and a generic commendation letter that somehow managed to misspell her name. At the airport, the discrimination began immediately. Despite being one of the first passengers to arrive at security, a TSA agent pulled her aside. "Random check, ma'am," he said, without making eye contact. Though he hadn't randomly selected any of the white passengers ahead of her, Jasmine complied silently, having learned long ago that objecting only made these situations worse. She'd missed flights before when random checks mysteriously became more thorough after she questioned their randomness. After clearing security, she headed to her gate where first-class passengers were already boarding. She had splurged on a premium ticket, wanting to be well-rested for her interview. "Excuse me," said Flight Attendant Richard Bailey, a tall man with a perpetually pinched expression as she handed him her boarding pass. "I think there's been a mistake. This is first-class boarding." "Yes, I have a first-class ticket," Jasmine replied, evenly pointing to the clearly marked boarding zone on her pass. Bailey examined her ticket with theatrical skepticism before reluctantly stepping aside. "Very well, seat 2A is on your right." Jasmine found her seat, but the microaggressions continued. The businessman assigned to 2B glanced at her, frowned, and immediately called Bailey over to request a seat change. 2 minutes later, he was happily settled elsewhere, leaving the seat next to her conspicuously empty on an otherwise full flight. Tired of the stares and whispered comments, Jasmine approached Bailey during the drink service. "Is there any availability in economy? I'd prefer to move." Bailey seemed surprised but quickly arranged the switch, not bothering to mention any refund for the downgrade. That's how Jasmine Washington ended up in seat 12B, surrounded by other passengers who clutched their bags a little tighter when she passed and subtly shifted away when she sat down. The middle-aged white man in 12C, who introduced himself as Gregory Spencer, spent the first hour of the flight explaining the airline industry to her despite her polite mentions of her military flying experience. "The thing about these big airlines," Spencer said condescendingly, "is that they're so focused on diversity hires these days that they're overlooking qualified people. No offense, but when I see a female pilot or a minority pilot, I always wonder if they're really the best person for the job or just filling a quota. Jasmine inserted her earbuds and turned up her music, having heard variations of this speech throughout her entire career. She closed her eyes, letting her mind drift to the technical specifications she needed to memorize for her interview, pushing down the familiar bitterness that threatened to surface. When the plane first hit turbulence, she barely noticed. But when Captain Reynolds burst into the cabin looking half dead, she felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. Part of her, the dedicated officer who had taken an oath to serve and protect, immediately wanted to help. But another part, the woman who had faced discrimination at every turn, wondered why she should risk herself for a system that had never valued her. As Reynolds repeated his desperate plea for anyone with flying experience, Jasmine's internal conflict intensified. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same people who had questioned her qualifications her entire career were now frantically searching for someone qualified to save them. Captain Reynolds clutched his stomach as he scanned the passengers' faces for any sign of recognition or response. Behind him, First Officer Scott Bennett was being attended to by Flight Attendant Patricia Miller, who was struggling to keep him conscious. Both men had begun experiencing severe symptoms shortly after consuming the crew: meals, violent stomach cramps, cold sweats, and dizziness that made controlling the aircraft nearly impossible. Both pilots. Food poisoning. Reynolds managed to explain to Richard Bailey, between painful spasms. Need someone with experience. Can't hold course much longer. Bailey's normally composed demeanor crumbled as he processed the gravity of the situation. "Should I call for any doctors on board?" he asked, his voice rising with panic. "No time. Need a pilot," Reynolds gasped. "Autopilot holding for now. But someone needs to land this plane." In the cockpit, Patricia was frantically communicating with air traffic control, her voice tight with controlled panic. "This is Flight 2187 declaring an emergency. Both pilots experiencing severe illness, possibly food poisoning. We need emergency landing coordinates and medical assistance upon arrival." The response from air traffic control only amplified the crisis. Flight 2187 nearest suitable airport is Lajes Field in the Azores, approximately 300 miles from your current position. Can your pilots maintain control until arrival? Patricia looked at Bennett, who was now slumped in his seat, barely coherent. Negative, tower. We need alternatives. Is there any closer option? Negative, Flight 2187. You're over the Mid-Atlantic. Azores is your best option. Can anyone else on board operate the aircraft? Bailey returned to the cockpit, relaying Captain Reynolds' desperate plea to the passengers. The autopilot is maintaining our course for now, but critical decisions need to be made soon. Without intervention, we will not be able to land safely. Outside, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The flight path would take them over vast stretches of open ocean with no alternative landing sites. Weather reports indicated a storm system moving in from the south, potentially cutting off their route to the Azores if they delayed too long. And with both pilots essentially incapacitated, even routine flight management had become a crisis. In the cabin, the atmosphere transformed from casual vacation chatter to palpable fear. A young mother clutched her child tightly. An elderly couple held hands, whispering prayers. A businessman frantically typed what appeared to be last messages to loved ones. Gregory Spencer, who had been lecturing Jasmine about airline incompetence just minutes earlier, now became a focal point for passenger anxiety. He stood up, addressing Bailey loudly. "This is outrageous. You're telling us both pilots are sick at the same time. What kind of operation is this airline running?" "Sir, please remain seated," Bailey requested, trying to maintain order. "We deserve answers," Spencer continued, his voice getting louder. "What are our chances? Is there a co-pilot? What's the backup plan? His agitation spread through the cabin like a contagion. More passengers began shouting questions, some crying, others arguing about what should be done. The plane, still on autopilot, gave another violent shudder as it encountered turbulence, sending a wave of screams through the cabin. Amid the chaos, Jasmine Washington sat quietly, her military training kicking in as she assessed the situation. Food poisoning affecting both pilots suggested they had eaten the same contaminated meal. The plane was a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, an aircraft she had trained on extensively during her time with the Air Force. The Atlantic crossing was challenging but manageable with the right approach. She analyzed their options with methodical precision. Their current altitude and speed were sustainable under autopilot, but landing would require manual intervention. The Azores were within range, but the approaching storm system complicated matters. Emergency water landing was a last resort, with extremely poor survival rates. As Bailey attempted to calm the increasingly hysterical passengers, Jasmine noticed Captain Reynolds leaning heavily against a wall, his condition worsening. Patricia was dividing her attention between the ailing pilots and the radio, clearly overwhelmed by the technical questions from air traffic control. Spencer's voice cut through the cabin again.
Someone needs to take control. This is completely unacceptable. We're all going to die because this airline couldn't ensure proper food safety.
The growing panic was becoming as dangerous as the lack of a pilot. Mass hysteria could make any rescue attempt nearly impossible. Jasmine knew from her military experience that chaos kills as surely as technical failures. Still, she hesitated. Years of being undermined, questioned, and passed over had taught her that offering help often led to skepticism at best and outright rejection at worst. Even in this crisis, would they trust her abilities? Or would the same biases that had plagued her career now endanger everyone on board? As Bailey made another pass through the cabin, desperately scanning faces for anyone with flying experience, Jasmine made her decision. Despite everything, she couldn't sit by and watch a disaster unfold when she had the skills to prevent it. Jasmine stood up as Bailey passed her bow. "I can help," she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the cabin's chaos. Bailey barely glanced at her. "Please return to your seat, ma'am. We're handling the situation." "I'm a pilot," Jasmine said more firmly. "Former Air Force major with 15 years of experience. I've flown Boeing aircraft, including this model." Bailey stopped, turning slowly to face her. His expression shifted from dismissal to confusion, then to suspicious disbelief. "You a pilot? Where's your uniform?" The question was so absurd that Jasmine almost laughed. "I'm traveling as a civilian. I left the service last year. But I have extensive experience with emergency situations and aircraft systems." By now, their conversation had attracted attention from nearby passengers. Gregory Spencer, who had been loudly complaining just moments before, pushed his way toward them. "Are you seriously considering letting her fly this plane?" he asked incredulously, gesturing at Jasmine, as if her gender and race were disqualifying factors. Bailey hesitated clearly, torn between desperation and doubt. "I need to inform the captain." He hurried to where Captain Reynolds was now sitting pale and sweating in a jump seat near the cockpit. Their conversation was brief but animated, with Reynolds repeatedly glancing back at Jasmine with obvious skepticism. Bailey returned with the captain trailing shakily behind him. "You claim to have military flight experience," Reynolds asked, his voice weak but his eyes sharp with suspicion. "Major Jasmine Washington, United States Air Force, retired," she replied calmly. "F-16 combat pilot for 8 years, then transitioned to larger aircraft. I've logged over 5,000 hours on various platforms, including the C-17 Globemaster and Boeing commercial equivalents." Reynolds narrowed his eyes. "If you're so experienced, tell me about the 787's electrical system architecture. It was a test, and Jasmine recognized it immediately. The 787 Dreamliner uses a more electric architecture than previous Boeing models, with a 230 VAC variable frequency system, replacing traditional hydraulics in many applications. The electrical system is distributed through dual primary power distribution assemblies and 4 panel assemblies. Electrical power is generated by 2 engine-mounted generators per engine, with 2 additional generators on the APU. The system includes lithium-ion batteries that were redesigned after the 2013 grounding incidents due to fire hazards. Reynolds blinked clearly, not expecting such a detailed response, and the emergency descent procedure: set thrust levers to idle deploy speed brakes, turn off auto throttle, extend landing gear if airspeed permits to increase drag in extreme situations, and target optimal descent rate based on passenger safety and aircraft structural limitations. Simultaneously, declare emergency with ATC and transponder code 7700. Jasmine recited, her voice steady. Bailey and Reynolds exchanged looks. The captain's medical distress was worsening by the minute, but his professional caution remained intact.
How do I know you're telling the truth about your credentials?
Before Jasmine could respond, Spencer interjected again. This is insane. You can't just hand over a commercial airliner to someone who walks up claiming to be a pilot. She could be anyone. Bailey, caught in an impossible situation, looked around desperately. Is there anyone else with flying experience? Anyone at all? Silence fell across the cabin. Despite Spencer's objections, no alternatives emerged. Reynolds doubled over with another wave of pain. Bailey, take her to the cockpit. Patricia can verify some of her knowledge before we let her touch anything. We're running out of options. As Bailey led Jasmine toward the cockpit, passengers watched with expressions ranging from hope to outright hostility. She heard the whispers clearly. They're letting her fly, just like that. Is this some kind of affirmative action emergency? I guess we're all going to die anyway, so what difference does it make? Most hurtful was the comment from an elderly white man in first class, Walter Fleming, who didn't bother to lower his voice. They're letting the cleaning lady fly. Lord, help us all. Jasmine kept her expression neutral, focusing on the task ahead rather than the prejudice around her. Years in the military had taught her that proving people wrong was more effective than arguing with them. If she could save this plane, no one would remember their doubts, only her competence. As they reached the cockpit door, Bailey hesitated one final time. If you're lying about any of this, then we're in the same situation we're in now, Jasmine replied evenly. But I'm not lying. Let me help before it's too late. With a deep breath, Bailey unlocked the cockpit door. First Officer Bennett was now completely incapacitated in his seat, with Patricia trying to keep him stable. The control panels blinked with warning lights, and the radio crackled with increasingly urgent requests from air traffic control. Jasmine stepped into the cockpit, immediately assessing the situation with a professional eye. Whatever doubts Bailey and the others had the moment her hands touched the familiar controls, everyone in that small space could see the truth. Jasmine Washington wasn't just a pilot. She was exactly who they needed in this moment of 5 crisis. The cockpit of Flight 2187 was a symphony of warning indicators and alert tones when Jasmine took her position in the captain's seat. Her hands moved with practiced precision across the glass displays and control systems, quickly absorbing critical information about the aircraft's status. Autopilot is holding, but we've got multiple systems requiring attention. She announced, her voice shifting into the crisp, authoritative tone she'd used on countless missions. Patricia, contact ATC and inform them we have pilot assistance on board and are assessing the situation. Patricia nodded, relieved to have clear direction. Air traffic control, this is Flight 2187. We have secured pilot assistance and are evaluating our emergency options. Standing by for further instructions. The response came immediately, the controller's voice betraying surprise at hearing a new voice. Flight 2187. Who are we speaking with? Is one of the pilots recovered? Negative tower. This is Flight Attendant Patricia Miller. We have a passenger with extensive flight experience assisting us now. There was a pause before the controller responded. Understood. Can we speak directly with the assisting pilot? Jasmine took the headset Patricia offered. This is Jasmine Washington, former Air Force Major taking temporary command of Flight 2187. Requesting immediate weather update for Lajes Field and alternate landing sites within our fuel range. Another pause longer this time. Can we speak with the actual pilot, please? We need to coordinate with certified personnel. Jasmine's jaw tightened, but her voice remained professional. The actual pilots are incapacitated. I have 15 years of military flight experience, including Boeing commercial platforms. You can verify my credentials through Air Force records if needed, but right now, I'm all you've got. Bailey, who had remained in the cockpit, watched Jasmine with growing respect as she efficiently assessed the aircraft systems. She had already identified issues beyond what they had initially realized. We have a slow fuel leak in the right-wing tank, she noted, pointing to the fuel balance indicators. Not critical yet, but it affects our range calculations. And there's an intermittent error in the primary navigation system. As she systematically worked through the immediate challenges, Jasmine's mind flashed back to similar high-pressure situations during her military service. The time her F-16 had been hit by enemy fire over hostile territory, forcing her to nurse the damaged aircraft back to friendly airspace. The emergency medical evacuation flight through a thunderstorm with failing instruments. The training exercises where instructors deliberately induced system failures to test pilots' responses. Each memory reinforced what she already knew she was made for, moments like this. We need to adjust our flight path, she decided, studying the navigation display and weather radar. The current route takes us too close to that developing storm system, and with our fuel situation, we can't afford to burn extra avoiding weather. I'm calculating a new approach to Lajes Field in the Azores. Her fingers moved across the flight management system, inputting new coordinates with confident precision. This will give us the most direct route while maintaining our fuel margin. Do you have the authority to make these changes? Bailey asked nervously. In an emergency situation with incapacitated command, pilots' FAA regulations permit qualified personnel to take necessary actions to ensure passenger safety, Jasmine replied, without looking up. And right now, these changes are necessary. As she worked, Patricia returned from checking on the passengers. There's a situation developing in the cabin, she reported quietly. That man, Mr. Spencer, is telling other passengers that we don't know if Miss Washington is really qualified. He's suggesting we should wait for instructions from the airline rather than letting her take control. Jasmine continued her work unsurprised. Focus on the tasks at hand. Spencer's opinion won't change our fuel levels or the approaching storm. Bailey observed her with newfound admiration. You seem so calm. How can you remain so composed with everything that's happening? When you've flown combat missions, with people actively trying to shoot you down, handling a mechanical emergency, with passengers who doubt you, seems relatively straightforward, she replied, with a slight smile. The radio crackled again. Flight 2187, this is Lajes Field approach. We need to speak with the pilot in command. Jasmine took the headset once more. This is Acting Pilot in Command, Jasmine Washington. I'm preparing to begin our approach to your facility. We have dual pilot incapacitation fuel system concerns and navigation system irregularities. Request priority landing clearance and emergency services on standby. Roger 2187. Can you provide your pilot certification number and verification codes? Jasmine took a deep breath. Tower, I am operating under emergency authorization provisions. The certified pilots are medically incapacitated. I am a former military pilot currently flying as a civilian. There is no time for bureaucratic verification. We have a plane full of passengers and deteriorating systems. Will you provide landing clearance? Or shall I declare a mayday and proceed regardless? Her directness finally broke through. Understood 2187. We're clearing a runway and scrambling emergency services. Continue on your current heading and prepare for priority approach instructions. What do you think about Jasmine taking control of the situation? Have you ever been in a crisis where someone unexpected stepped up to help? Comment, respect, if you admire Jasmine's courage despite facing discrimination. Like this video if you believe in standing up to prejudice, even in the face of doubters like Spencer. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories of everyday heroes. The real question is, with a potential sabotage situation developing in the cabin and critical mechanical issues in the cockpit, can Jasmine save everyone on board? Let's find out as our story continues. Gregory Spencer was not a man accustomed to having his authority questioned. As a senior vice president at a financial consulting firm, he was used to people following his lead without hesitation. The current situation being ignored while a black woman took command of their aircraft was triggering a visceral response he couldn't quite suppress. "This is completely irresponsible," he muttered to the businessman seated next to him. "They're just letting some random woman fly this plane without any verification. She could be making the situation worse." The other passenger, initially receptive, glanced toward the cockpit. "I don't know, man." She seemed to know what she was talking about with all that technical jargon. "That's easy to fake if you've watched enough movies," Spencer countered, pulling out his tablet. "I've got Wi-Fi access. Let's see if this Major Washington actually exists." Spencer connected to the plane's premium internet service and began searching. To his surprise, he did find information about a Major Jasmine Washington, multiple news articles about Air Force commendations, a military aviation journal mentioning her accomplishments, even a Pentagon press release about diversity and combat roles featuring her photo. But rather than accepting this evidence, Spencer's mind immediately began searching for ways to discredit her. He zeroed in on a forum post from a military discussion site where an anonymous user claimed a female pilot had been discharged for incompetence. The post didn't mention Jasmine by name, had no verification, and was contradicted by official sources, but Spencer latched onto it. Just as I suspected, he announced loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, she was forced out of the military. Probably couldn't handle the pressure. A small group of like-minded passengers had gathered around Spencer, drawn by his confident demeanor in the midst of crisis. He showed them his tablet, carefully highlighting the anonymous forum post while minimizing the legitimate news sources. "We're trusting our lives to someone who couldn't even keep her military career on track," he continued. "The real pilots would never have let this happen. The airline is going to face serious lawsuits over this." Bailey, returning from the cockpit to check on passengers, overheard Spencer's comments. He hesitated, torn between protocol, which dictated maintaining calm at all costs, and the growing realization that Spencer was creating a dangerous situation. "Sir, I need to ask you to keep your voice down," Bailey said quietly. "Miss Washington is working to ensure our safety." "Our safety?" Spencer scoffed. "She's probably the biggest threat to our safety right now. How do we know she's not making split-second decisions that could kill us all? I've done my research. She was discharged from the Air Force, probably for incompetence." Bailey frowned. "That's not accurate, sir. She retired after 15 years of distinguished service." "That's what she told you," Spencer countered. "Have you verified that? Has anyone actually checked her credentials? For all we know, she could be making the situation worse, while the airline could be sending proper instructions." The doubt in Bailey's eyes was all the encouragement Spencer needed. He sensed vulnerability and pressed his advantage. "Shouldn't we at least consider other options? Isn't there someone from the airline we can consult?" or another passenger with legitimate flying experience. As Spencer spoke, his message began spreading through the cabin. Passengers, already frightened by the emergency, were looking for something to control in an uncontrollable situation. Questioning the qualifications of the stranger now flying their plane gave them an illusion of agency. The cabin slowly divided those trusting Jasmine's expertise versus those believing Spencer's manufactured doubts. Most passengers simply wanted to survive and were willing to support whoever seemed most confident, which unfortunately for everyone currently appeared to be Spencer with his forceful personality and misleading evidence. Unknown to the passengers, an air marshal was on board. Thomas Reeves had maintained his cover during the initial crisis, observing the situation carefully before deciding how to intervene. Now dressed in casual business attire, he sat quietly 3 rows behind Spencer, monitoring the growing descent with increasing concern. Reeves knew the protocol for flight emergencies and understood that fragmenting authority during a crisis could be catastrophic. Yet he also recognized the unusual nature of this situation. A non-crew member taking control of the aircraft raised legitimate security questions. He needed more information before taking action. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Jasmine was completely focused on managing the aircraft's deteriorating systems, unaware of the conspiracy brewing in the cabin. She had successfully rerouted their approach to Lajes Field and was continuously adjusting their descent rate to compensate for the fuel imbalance caused by the leak. Patricia, monitoring communications with ground control, was impressed by Jasmine's competence, but increasingly concerned about the situation in the cabin. She had heard snippets of Spencer's comments when checking on the ailing pilots in the crew rest area. "Should we inform Ms. Washington about what's happening with the passengers?" she asked Bailey when he returned to the cockpit. Bailey hesitated. She needs to focus on flying, but if Spencer convinces enough people to interfere. The unfinished thought hung in the air between them. Both understood the potentially catastrophic implications if passengers attempted to remove Jasmine from the controls during this critical phase. "I'll handle the cabin," Bailey decided. "You stay here and assist Washington." As Bailey returned to the passenger cabin, he found Spencer had gathered a group of about 8 men, all speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Their body language suggested they were preparing for action rather than just discussing the situation. "Once we get close enough to land, we need to make sure a real pilot takes over," Spencer was saying. "If we wait until the last minute, it'll be too late to correct whatever mistakes she's made." Bailey approached the group, his heart racing. "Gentlemen, I need to ask you to return to your seats and secure your seatbelts. We're preparing for our emergency approach." Spencer looked up, his expression hardening. "We know what you're doing. You've handed control of this aircraft to an unverified person without proper authority. We have a right to ensure our own safety. Mr. Spencer, interfering with flight crew duties during an emergency is a federal offense," Bailey replied, trying to sound authoritative despite his own lingering doubts. "She's not flight crew," Spencer countered smoothly. "She's a passenger who you've improperly allowed to take control. If anything, we're trying to restore proper protocol." The standoff was interrupted by a violent shudder as the aircraft encountered turbulence from the approaching storm system. The overhead bins rattled and oxygen masks dropped in several rows, a system malfunction triggered by the sudden pressure change. Passengers screamed and Spencer's resolve seemed to falter momentarily. Through the windows, dark storm clouds were now clearly visible on the horizon, a physical manifestation of the danger they faced. Over the intercom, Jasmine's calm voice cut through the panic. "This is Acting Pilot Washington. We're experiencing expected turbulence as we begin our descent. The oxygen mask deployment was a system malfunction. Cabin pressure remains normal. Please remain in your seats, with seatbelts fastened as we navigate around the storm system." The professional confidence in her voice gave Bailey renewed certainty. Whatever Spencer and his allies were planning, they needed to be stopped. The safety of everyone on board depended on Jasmine Washington maintaining control of the aircraft until they reached Lajes Field. As Bailey turned to return to the cockpit, he locked eyes with a calm-looking man who had been observing the situation. With a subtle nod, Air Marshal Reeves indicated he was monitoring the developing situation. The silent communication gave Bailey a small measure of comfort. He wasn't alone in recognizing the danger Spencer posed. In the cockpit, oblivious to the conspiracy forming in the cabin, Jasmine continued making the precise adjustments that were keeping Flight 2187 airborne. Her focus remained absolute. Each calculation, each correction, potentially the difference between survival and disaster. The tension in the aircraft reached its breaking point. As Spencer led his group toward the cockpit, Bailey positioned himself firmly in front of the cockpit door, arms crossed. "That's far enough, sir," he said, voice steadier than he felt. "No passengers are permitted in the cockpit during this emergency." Spencer stopped just short of Bailey, flanked by 5 other men. "We're not asking permission. We have a right to ensure our safety. This unqualified woman needs to stand down until proper authorities can provide instructions. Miss Washington is the only qualified person available to fly this aircraft," Bailey countered. "The captains are incapacitated, and we're in the middle of an emergency landing approach." Spencer's face flushed with anger. "You don't know she's qualified. You're taking her word for it. For all we know, she could be deliberately sabotaging our flight path." The absurdity of the accusation stunned Bailey momentarily. Why would she do that? She's on this plane too. Who knows what her agenda is? Spencer shot back. Maybe she's making a political statement. Maybe she's mentally unstable. The point is, you handed control of this aircraft to her without proper verification, and we demand it stop now. The confrontation was drawing attention from other passengers. Some looked frightened by the escalating situation, while others seemed to be considering joining Spencer's side. Suddenly, a well-dressed man stepped forward from the crowd. "Federal Air Marshal Thomas Reeves," he announced, displaying his credentials. "This confrontation ends now." A murmur ran through the cabin. Spencer, momentarily taken aback, quickly recovered. "Perfect timing, Marshal. We need your help removing an unqualified person who has taken control of the aircraft without authorization." Reeves studied Spencer coolly. "I've been monitoring the situation since it began, sir. My initial concern was indeed about Miss Washington taking control without verification." Spencer smiled triumphantly. "Then you'll help us remove her." "I didn't say that," Reeves replied evenly. "Before taking action, I performed my due diligence." He turned to address the watching passengers. "While Mr. Spencer was conducting his research on civilian forums, I used secure federal channels to verify Miss Washington's identity and qualifications. She is indeed a former Air Force major with an exemplary flying record. Her military service includes emergency situations far more complex than this one." Spencer's confidence wavered visibly. "That doesn't make her qualified to fly a commercial airliner." "Actually, it does," Reeves countered. "Her military transport experience included Boeing aircraft with similar systems to this one. FAA emergency protocols explicitly permit qualified military pilots to assist in civilian aircraft emergencies." As if to punctuate his point, the intercom activated, and Jasmine's voice filled the cabin. "This is Acting Pilot Washington. We're beginning our approach to Lajes Field. The local weather is deteriorating rapidly, and we're dealing with multiple system malfunctions. I need everyone seated and secured immediately. Any interference with flight operations at this critical stage will endanger everyone on board." Spencer, unwilling to back down despite the marshal's intervention, tried one last appeal to the passengers. "She could be saying anything. We have no way to verify what's really happening." From the rear of the cabin, an elegant black woman in her 60s stood up. "I can verify it," she said, in a clear, authoritative voice. All heads turned toward her. "Dr. Amara Okafor," she introduced herself. "Chief of Neurosurgery at Mayo Clinic. I was seated near the cockpit earlier, and observed the instrument panels. What Miss Washington described is exactly what I saw. The situation is critical and requires immediate action. She fixed Spencer with a penetrating stare. What's truly interesting is your insistence that she must be unqualified despite growing evidence to the contrary. I have to wonder if your certainty is based on her capabilities or on something else entirely. The implication hung in the air, causing several of Spencer's supporters to step back, unwilling to be associated with the suggested prejudice. Spencer sputtered. "This has nothing to do with—" "Your objections have been noted," Reeves interrupted firmly. "Now, as a federal officer, I am ordering everyone to return to their seats immediately. Any further interference with flight operations will result in arrest upon landing." The marshal's authority, combined with Dr. Okafor's testimony, finally broke the momentum of Spencer's resistance. His supporters drifted away, returning to their seats with varying degrees of reluctance. As the confrontation dissipated, the aircraft suddenly lurched violently to one side. Warning alarms blared from the cockpit, and the lights flickered throughout the cabin. Patricia's voice came urgently over the intercom. "Everyone secure immediately. We're experiencing a hydraulic system failure." Bailey turned to Spencer, who stood frozen in the aisle. "Decision time, Mr. Spencer. Trust the qualified pilot we have, or continue this crusade and risk all our lives. Choose quickly." In the cockpit, Jasmine was fighting to maintain control as the hydraulic pressure dropped precipitously. The control column had become sluggish, requiring substantially more force to execute even basic maneuvers. Warning indicators illuminated across the panels as primary systems began failing in sequence. "We've lost primary hydraulics," she announced to Patricia, who was now functioning as her co-pilot, switching to backup systems and manual control procedures. The timing couldn't have been worse. They were now approaching the outer bands of the storm system, and the aircraft was buffeted by increasing turbulence. Without fully functioning hydraulics, each gust threatened to push them off their carefully calculated approach path. Back in the cabin, Marshal Reeves had taken control of the situation. "Everyone in your seats, seatbelts fastened," he commanded with practiced authority. "Prepare for emergency landing procedures." Even Spencer, facing the reality of their situation, finally returned to his seat. The conspiracy to remove Jasmine had collapsed in the face of immediate danger. Bailey rushed back to the cockpit to assist. What he saw there would forever change his perception of competence and prejudice. Jasmine Washington, sweat beading on her forehead, was physically wrestling the controls while simultaneously reprogramming backup systems. Her focus was absolute, her movements precise despite the enormous physical effort required to fly the aircraft manually. "What can I do?" Bailey asked, humbled by the scene before him. "Secure the cabin," Jasmine replied without looking up. "This landing is going to be rough." "And Bailey," she added as he turned to leave, "tell everyone that regardless of what they think of me, I promise I'm doing everything humanly possible to get us all home safely." Bailey nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "I know you are," he said quietly. "And for what it's worth, I'm sorry I doubted you." As Bailey returned to help secure the cabin, the full weight of the emergency became clear to everyone on board. The prejudice that had seemed so important minutes before now appeared trivial in the face of their shared mortality. In that moment, what mattered wasn't the race or gender of their pilot, but simply her ability to save their lives. Nature seemed determined to test Jasmine Washington's skills to their absolute limits. As Flight 2187 approached the Azores, the storm system that had been tracking south suddenly accelerated northward directly into their path. The massive wall of cumulonimbus clouds loomed ahead, streaked with lightning and churning with violent updrafts. Lajes Field Tower. "This is Flight 2187. Jasmine," communicated through crackling static. "The storm has shifted. Request immediate alternate approach vectors." The response came back fragmented. "Flight 2187, storm, covering all approaches. No alternative routes. Recommend holding pattern until passage. Jasmine checked their fuel gauges. The leak in the right wing tank had worsened, and their reserves were now critically low. Negative tower. Insufficient fuel for holding pattern. We must attempt approach now. She turned to Patricia, who had remained in the cockpit assisting with communications. We're going through it. There's no other option. Patricia's eyes widened. Through the storm? Is that even possible? Possible, yes. Pleasant, definitely not. Jasmine replied, her focus unwavering as she adjusted their approach. Inform the passengers to prepare for extreme turbulence. As Patricia made the announcement, Jasmine performed a rapid mental calculation. Their current altitude, airspeed, and the storm's intensity all factored into her decision-making. She needed to find the least dangerous path through the towering meteorological monster ahead. We'll approach at 12,000 feet, she decided. The storm tops out around 35,000, but going underneath increases the lightning risk. 12,000 gives us the best compromise between wind shear and electrical exposure. Without fully functioning hydraulics, the aircraft responded sluggishly to Jasmine's commands. What would normally be minor adjustments now required significant physical strength to execute. She could feel her arms beginning to burn with the effort of maintaining control. As they entered the outer bands of the storm, the first impacts hit the aircraft. The Boeing 787 shuddered violently as conflicting air currents slammed into it from multiple directions. Overhead bins popped open despite being secured, and oxygen masks dangled in several sections. In the cabin, passengers white-knuckled their armrests. Even Spencer, who had been so vocal about Jasmine's qualifications, sat in terrified silence as the reality of their situation became viscerally clear. This was no longer about who was right, it was about survival. Air Marshal Reeves moved through the cabin, helping flight attendants secure loose items and calming panicked passengers. His training in crisis management proved invaluable as he projected calm authority amidst the chaos. The turbulence is normal given the conditions, he reassured an elderly couple clutching each other in fear. Our pilot is taking the safest possible route through the storm. In the cockpit, conditions were deteriorating rapidly. Warning systems blared as the aircraft sensors detected wind shear conditions and potential icing. The navigation displays flickered intermittently, threatening to leave them flying blind through the tempest. We've lost primary navigation, Jasmine announced, switching to backup systems without breaking her concentration, transitioning to inertial guidance and ground radar tracking. A violent downdraft suddenly caught the aircraft, sending it plummeting several hundred feet in seconds. Jasmine fought the controls, using every ounce of her strength and experience to arrest their descent. Negative vertical, she called out, using the pilot terminology for a sudden drop, compensating with maximum safe thrust. The engines roared in response as she pushed them to their limits, fighting against gravity's inexorable pull. For a heart-stopping moment, the aircraft continued to fall. Then gradually the descent slowed and finally stabilized. Patricia, who had been holding her breath, exhaled shakily. How did you know to do that? Afghanistan, 2018. Jasmine replied tersely, her focus unwavering. Dust storm during a medical evacuation. Same principles apply, just more water and electricity this time. Lightning flashed around them with increasing frequency, momentarily turning the cockpit blindingly white before plunging it back into artificial twilight. Each strike threatened the aircraft's electronic systems already compromised by the earlier malfunctions. In the jump seat behind them, First Officer Bennett had regained partial consciousness, though he remained too ill to assist. He watched Jasmine's handling of the crisis with professional appreciation despite his condition. "You're doing well," he managed to say between waves of nausea. "Better than many certified commercial pilots I've known." Jasmine didn't respond verbally, but the slight nod of her head acknowledged his comment. Coming from a professional pilot, it was perhaps the first genuine recognition of her skills since she'd stepped into the cockpit. The hydraulic pressure warning light began flashing again, indicating further deterioration of their control systems. Simultaneously, the fuel imbalance between wing tanks reached critical levels. "We're losing the backup hydraulics," Jasmine announced, her voice calm despite the implications, transferring to manual reversion controls. This was the scenario pilots trained for, but hoped never to experience flying a modern airliner using essentially mechanical linkages with minimal power assistance. The physical demands would be enormous. "I need help on the controls," Jasmine said to Bennett. "Can you assist at all?" The first officer tried to rise but fell back, still too weak from the food poisoning. "Can't. Sorry." "I'll help," came Bailey's voice from the doorway. He had returned to the cockpit after securing the cabin as best he could. Jasmine nodded. "Take the right seat. On my command, pull back on the control column with everything you've got." Bailey strapped himself into the co-pilot's position, placing his hands on the controls. He'd never imagined himself in this position, but the determination in Jasmine's eyes gave him confidence. Now Jasmine commanded as another downdraft caught the aircraft. Together, they physically hauled back on the controls, fighting against the immense aerodynamic forces threatening to push the aircraft's nose down. Bailey's face contorted with effort, muscles straining against the resistance. "Hold it. Hold it." Jasmine coached her own arms, trembling with exertion. "We just need to maintain this attitude until we clear the cell's core." Outside, lightning struck even closer. The thunder instantaneous and deafening. The electrical discharge caused momentary havoc with the few functioning instruments they had left. "We've lost the altimeter," Jasmine noted with professional detachment, switching to backup barometric readings. She was drawing on her most challenging military experiences. Now the times when everything went wrong simultaneously, when there was no textbook solution, only the pilot's judgment and skill, standing between disaster and survival. In the passenger cabin, the turbulence had reached such intensity that several people had become ill. Others prayed openly, while some sat in stunned silence. The shared experience had erased the earlier divisions, with former adversaries now offering comfort to one another. Even Gregory Spencer had undergone a transformation. The man who had been so certain of Jasmine's incompetence now sat quietly humbled by the reality of their situation and his own prejudices. When a young woman next to him began crying in fear, he awkwardly offered her his handkerchief. "The pilot knows what she's doing," he found himself saying, though he had been arguing the opposite just minutes earlier. "We'll make it through this." In the cockpit, Jasmine could see a slight brightening ahead. They were approaching the edge of the storm cell. But the final challenge remained the violent outflow boundary, where colliding air masses created the most dangerous turbulence of all. "Prepare for maximum turbulence," she warned Bailey and Patricia. "This is where it gets interesting." As if on cue, the aircraft bucked, violently, tossed between conflicting air currents like a toy. Warning alarms that hadn't already been sounding now joined the cacophony. The control column jerked in their hands, threatening to tear free from their grasp. "Don't fight it directly," Jasmine shouted over the noise. "Work with the oscillations, counter the trend, not each movement." It was advanced piloting technique, the kind taught to test pilots and combat aviators, not typically needed in commercial aviation. Bailey tried his best to follow her lead, matching her inputs as she expertly rode the violent air currents rather than fighting them directly. For 30 seconds, that felt like an eternity. Flight 2187 was at nature's mercy, shaking so violently that rivets strained and overhead panels cracked. Passengers screamed as their bodies were pressed against seatbelts, then weightless, then pressed again in rapid succession. Then suddenly they broke through. The violence subsided, the light outside brightened, and the shaking reduced to a manageable level. They had traversed the storm's worst section. "We're clear," Jasmine announced, her voice betraying exhaustion for the first time. "Damage assessment." Bailey checked the system indicators, many now showing red or amber warnings. Multiple system failures, but main structural integrity appears intact. Fuel critically low. Through the clearing clouds ahead, the island of Terceira in the Azores became visible, and with it the runway of Lodge's Field. They had made it through the storm, but the most challenging part of their journey still lay ahead. With damaged systems, minimal fuel, and physically exhausted pilots, they now faced the prospect of landing a crippled airliner on an unfamiliar runway. Begin final approach checklist. Jasmine directed her focus, unwavering, despite the ordeal they had just endured. We're going to bring this plane home. The relative calm after breaking through the storm was short-lived. Jasmine knew that landing a compromised aircraft would test her skills even more severely than the weather they'd just navigated. Lodge's Field Flight 2187 on final approach, she communicated. Aircraft has sustained multiple system failures. Request emergency services standing by. The controller's response was immediate. Flight 2187, runway 15 is clear. Wind 170 at 25 knots, gusting to 40. Caution advised for severe crosswinds. Emergency vehicles in position. Jasmine performed a rapid mental calculation. A 25-knot crosswind component was challenging even for an aircraft in perfect condition. For their damaged 787, it represented yet another significant hazard. Acknowledged tower. Beginning approach. First Officer Bennett had recovered enough to provide limited assistance, though he remained too weak to take control. Standard approach won't work, he cautioned. Not with our systems compromised and that crosswind. Agreed, Jasmine replied. We'll use a modified crosswind approach with a steeper than normal glide path to compensate for the hydraulic issues. It was an unconventional technique, one rarely needed in commercial aviation, but sometimes employed in military operations when landing damaged aircraft. The steeper approach would give them more energy if they needed to abort, while the modified crosswind technique would help counteract the gusting side winds. Bailey, I need you to relay instructions to the passengers Jasmine directed. Full brace position. This landing will be rough. As Bailey left to prepare the cabin, Patricia monitored the fuel situation. Right tank almost empty, left tank at 15% capacity. Just enough for one approach, Jasmine noted grimly. No go-arounds possible. This was the pilot's ultimate nightmare scenario, a single chance to land a damaged aircraft in dangerous conditions. If anything went wrong, there would be no opportunity to try again. In the passenger cabin, the mood had shifted from terror to tense anticipation. The violent turbulence was behind them, but the precarious nature of their situation remained apparent to everyone on board. The aircraft's unusual attitude and the visible damage to the wing visible from some windows made it clear they weren't out of danger. Bailey moved through the cabin, demonstrating the brace position. Heads down, hands over your head. If you're traveling with children, secure yourself first, then assist them. Gregory Spencer, subdued after his earlier behavior, quietly helped those around him prepare. The elderly couple next to him were struggling to understand the instructions, and he gently guided their hands into the proper position. "Will we make it?" the elderly woman asked him, fear evident in her trembling voice. Spencer hesitated. His natural inclination toward confident pronouncements had been humbled by recent events. "The pilot has gotten us this far," he finally said. "I believe she'll get us down safely." It was a simple statement, but for a man who had been leading a mutiny against that same pilot just minutes earlier, it represented a profound transformation. Air Marshal Reeves continued assisting the flight attendants, his calm demeanor, providing reassurance to frightened passengers. "Focus on your breathing," he advised. "Slow and steady. We're in good hands." In the cockpit, Jasmine began their final approach. The island of Terceira grew larger in their windscreen, its runway appearing impossibly small from their current altitude. "Beginning descent," she announced. "Landing gear extension." She pulled the landing gear lever, and they waited for the confirming thunk of wheels locking into position. Instead, a warning light illuminated. Landing gear malfunction, Jasmine announced, her voice remaining steady despite the new crisis. Right main gear not indicating down and locked. This changed everything. Landing with partially deployed gear could cause the aircraft to veer off the runway or worse. Options, Patricia asked. Jasmine quickly assessed their situation. No fuel for a go-around or holding pattern to troubleshoot? Manual gear extension is our only choice. In modern airliners, manual gear extension was rarely needed, but still possible through a complex emergency procedure. With their hydraulic systems compromised, it would require physical force to release and lower the gear. Bennett, can you access the manual release? Jasmine asked the first officer. He nodded weakly. I'll try. With Patricia's help, Bennett unstrapped from his seat and moved to the emergency access panel in the cockpit floor. Opening it revealed the manual release handle for the landing gear. Pull with everything you've got, Jasmine instructed. We need that gear down now. Bennett braced himself and pulled on the handle. Initially, nothing happened. Then, with a grunt of effort that clearly caused him pain in his weakened state, he gave one final pull. A loud mechanical sound resonated through the aircraft. Indicator shows right gear moving. Jasmine confirmed, watching the system display. Keep tension on the handle. Bennett maintained pressure, his face contorted with effort. After what seemed like an eternity, the indicator changed. Right gear showing down, Jasmine announced, but still no lock confirmation. This meant the gear was extended but might not be secure enough to support the weight of landing. It was a terrible dilemma: land now with potentially unstable gear or remain airborne until they ran out of fuel and faced an even more dangerous situation. We've got one shot at this, Jasmine decided. Prepare for possible right gear collapse on touchdown. As they continued their approach, Lodge's tower called again. Flight 2187, we're showing strong wind shear conditions on final approach. Previous landing aircraft reported 30-knot loss followed by 25-knot gain at 500 feet. Wind shear, sudden changes in wind direction and speed had brought down numerous aircraft throughout aviation history. Combined with their other problems, it represented yet another life-threatening challenge. Acknowledged tower. Adjusting approach accordingly. Jasmine increased their approach speed slightly, providing more energy to counter potential wind shear effects. It was a delicate balance. Too much speed would make stopping on the runway difficult, while too little could cause them to drop from the sky if they encountered a strong downdraft. Final approach checklist complete, Patricia reported. As complete as possible given our circumstances. Passing 1000 feet, Jasmine announced. Point of no return. The runway threshold was now clearly visible ahead. Jasmine's hands moved continuously, making micro adjustments to their descent path as gusting crosswinds buffeted the aircraft. Her military experience landing damaged aircraft in combat zones was now proving invaluable. 500 feet, she called out. Watch for wind shear. Almost on cue, the aircraft suddenly lost lift as it entered a pocket of sinking air. The 787 dropped precipitously, its rate of descent nearly doubling in an instant. Jasmine reacted with textbook precision, advancing the throttles to maximum and adjusting their pitch to counter the downward force. The engines roared in response, fighting against the invisible atmospheric enemy. For a moment, it seemed insufficient. The ground rushed up at an alarming rate. Then gradually, their descent rate stabilized. They had survived the wind shear, but it had pushed them dangerously close to the ground, with still some distance to the runway threshold. 200 feet airspeed stable, Jasmine reported, her voice betraying no hint of the immense stress she was under, preparing for touchdown. The crosswind continued to push against the aircraft, requiring Jasmine to employ a significant crab angle, pointing the nose into the wind while maintaining a straight ground track toward the runway. It was like trying to thread a needle while riding a motorcycle sideways. 100 feet. In the cabin, passengers were braced in position, many praying, others simply hoping. The unusual attitude of the aircraft was apparent to everyone. They were approaching the runway at an angle that seemed impossibly wrong to the untrained eye. 50 feet. Jasmine began the decrab maneuver, aligning the aircraft with the runway at the last possible moment while using opposite rudder to maintain their ground track. It was one of the most challenging techniques in aviation, requiring perfect timing and control. 30 feet, 20, 10. At the precise moment, she reduced power and raised the nose slightly for the flare maneuver that would soften their touchdown. The crosswind fought her every movement, threatening to push them off the narrow runway. With a firm thud, the left main gear contacted the runway, followed by the nose gear. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the right main gear, the one that hadn't properly indicated locked to touch down. When it did, there was an ominous metallic sound, but the gear held. They were down all 3 points of the landing triangle, supporting the massive airliner's weight. But their challenges weren't over. The crosswind continued to push against the aircraft, and with their compromised hydraulics, directional control was severely limited. Jasmine deployed thrust reversers and maximum available braking, fighting to keep the Boeing centered on the runway. For several heart-stopping seconds, it seemed they might veer off into the grassy field alongside the tarmac. Jasmine used differential braking, applying more pressure to one side than the other to maintain their track down the center line. Slowly, agonizingly, their speed decreased. The end of the runway loomed closer, the overrun area beyond it appearing impossibly small if they couldn't stop in time. Come on, Jasmine muttered, applying every technique she knew to slow the massive aircraft. With less than 500 feet of runway remaining, Flight 2187 finally slowed to a safe taxi speed. They had made it. Lajes Tower, Flight 2187, is down and clear of the active runway. Jasmine reported, her voice finally revealing a hint of the emotion she'd been suppressing throughout the ordeal. Request emergency vehicles approach for passenger evacuation. As the aircraft rolled to its final stopping position on the taxiway, the full impact of what had just occurred began to sink in for everyone aboard. Against all odds, facing multiple system failures, violent weather, and dangerous landing conditions, they had survived. In the cabin, the silence was broken by a single person beginning to clap. Others joined in the applause, swelling until it filled the aircraft, a spontaneous tribute to the skill and courage that had brought them safely to Earth. The door of Flight 2187 opened to reveal a small army of emergency personnel waiting on the tarmac. Paramedics boarded first, heading directly to Captain Reynolds and First Officer Bennett, who were still suffering from food poisoning but no longer in critical condition. Jasmine Washington stood aside in the cockpit, allowing medical staff to work. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the crisis was beginning to ebb, leaving her physically exhausted but mentally alert. She methodically shut down the aircraft systems that were still functioning, following proper procedure despite the extraordinary circumstances. Bailey approached her, his expression a mixture of admiration and lingering shame. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly. "You saved all our lives." Jasmine nodded, accepting his gratitude without fanfare. "Just doing what needed to be done." "No," Bailey insisted. "It was more than that. Most people wouldn't have stepped up after the way they were treated. I'm sorry I doubted you." "It's a familiar experience," Jasmine replied without bitterness. "Throughout my career, I've had to prove myself repeatedly in ways my colleagues never did." As they exited the cockpit, passengers were being carefully evacuated from the aircraft. Many stopped when they saw Jasmine offering heartfelt thanks or simply nodding in respect. The transformation from the suspicion and hostility she had faced earlier was remarkable. Near the exit, Gregory Spencer stood waiting. When Jasmine approached, he seemed to struggle with what to say. The man who had led a near mutiny against her now couldn't meet her eyes. "Miss Washington," he finally managed, "I owe you an apology, a significant one." Jasmine regarded him steadily. Yes, you do. Spencer flinched slightly at her directness. I made assumptions about your qualifications based on factors that had nothing to do with your abilities. I was wrong. And I nearly endangered everyone on board because of my prejudice. Recognition is the first step, Jasmine said. What matters now is what you do with that recognition going forward. Spencer nodded thoughtfully. I have some serious reflection to do. As they disembarked, the full scale of the media response became apparent. News crews from around the world had descended on the small Azores airport, alerted to the emergency by aviation tracking sites and social media. Camera flashes illuminated the night as passengers emerged from the aircraft. Unknown black woman saves flight 2187. The headlines would read the next morning. Videos of Jasmine's calm handling of the crisis captured by passengers and shared online would go viral within hours. Her story, the decorated Air Force pilot who faced discrimination then saved a plane load of people, resonated globally. 3 days later, after passengers had been accommodated in local hotels and arrangements made for continuing their journeys, Jasmine finally had a moment to herself. Sitting in her hotel room overlooking the Atlantic, she was surprised by a knock at the door. Outside stood James Whitfield, CEO of Atlantic International Airways, the company that operated Flight 2187. He had flown in personally. Major Washington, he greeted her with genuine respect. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, she replied, gesturing for him to enter. Whitfield didn't waste time with small talk. I've reviewed the flight recorder data and spoken with everyone involved. What you accomplished was nothing short of miraculous. Our best simulator pilots couldn't reproduce your landing under those conditions. Jasmine acknowledged the compliment with a nod. I'd like to offer you a position, Whitfield continued. Atlantic International needs pilots with your skills and judgment. We're prepared to make you a captain immediately with your choice of routes. Jasmine hadn't expected this. After years of being overlooked and undervalued, the offer of a prestigious position with no need to work her way up, as she'd always been told was necessary, was vindicating. I appreciate the offer, she said carefully. But I need to know, is this because of my abilities, or because I'm now a convenient symbol? Whitfield considered the question seriously. Initially, probably both. I won't pretend the publicity isn't valuable, but I've been in aviation for 30 years, and I've never seen flying like yours. Symbol or not, you belong in a cockpit. Over the next few days, similar offers arrived from other airlines, aircraft manufacturers, and even NASA. Jasmine's technical knowledge, combined with her proven grace under pressure, made her suddenly one of the most sought-after aviation professionals in the world. 1 week after the emergency landing, Atlantic International Airways held a press conference. Jasmine, now dressed in a captain's uniform, stood alongside CEO Whitfield. Today we're announcing not only that Major Jasmine Washington will be joining our airline, as a Captain Whitfield stated, but also the creation of the Washington Scholarship for Women and Minorities in Aviation. This program will provide full training and mentorship for underrepresented groups entering the field. The room erupted in applause. For Jasmine, this was the most meaningful part of her new position, the opportunity to create pathways for others who might otherwise face the same barriers she had encountered. After the press conference, Bailey approached her. He had undergone his own transformation since the flight, questioning long-held assumptions and biases. I've been thinking about what happened, he said. How differently I treated you based on appearance alone. I want to do better. Recognition without action isn't enough, Jasmine replied. What are you going to do about it? Bailey straightened. I'm organizing diversity and anti-bias training for all flight crews. The airline has approved it as mandatory. It's a small step, but it's a start. 6 months later, Captain Jasmine Washington prepared to command her first regular commercial flight. As she performed her pre-flight checks in the cockpit of the Boeing 787, A familiar face appeared at the door. Gregory Spencer, boarding as a passenger, stopped short when he recognized her. For a moment, he seemed unsure how to react. Then, he extended his hand. "Captain Washington," he said, his tone conveying genuine respect. "It's good to see you again." Jasmine accepted the handshake with professional courtesy. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Spencer." As Spencer took his seat in first class, directly visible from the cockpit, Jasmine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the discrimination that had driven her from military service, to the crisis that had revealed her extraordinary abilities to the world, each step had led to this moment. The radio crackled. "Atlantic 1157, you are cleared for pushback." Captain Jasmine Washington responded with calm confidence. "Roger Tower, Atlantic 1157 beginning pushback." As the aircraft moved away from the gate, Jasmine caught Spencer watching her through the open cockpit door. He gave her a nod of acknowledgement, not just of her presence, but of her rightful place at the controls. It was a small gesture that represented a larger shift both in one man's perspective and in the industry as a whole. The aircraft turned toward the runway, its powerful engines ready to carry them into the sky. Captain Washington's hands rested confidently on the controls where they had always belonged. This story reminds us that prejudice often blinds us to the extraordinary capabilities within those we dismiss. Jasmine Washington faced discrimination throughout her career, yet when crisis struck, her skills proved invaluable. The tragedy is how many talents go unrecognized because of biases based on race, gender, or background. Spencer's journey shows how deeply ingrained prejudice can be, requiring a literal life-or-death situation before he could recognize his error. Bailey's transformation demonstrates that acknowledging bias is only the first step. Action must follow. Dr. Okafor represents those who recognize merit, regardless of appearance, while the passenger's collective journey reflects society's potential for growth. The aviation industry in our story symbolizes any field where artificial barriers prevent qualified individuals from contributing their gifts. When we judge people based on appearance rather than abilities, we don't just harm them, we deprive ourselves of their talents. True progress comes when we create systems that recognize excellence wherever it exists, providing opportunities based on merit rather than preconceptions. Only then can we benefit from the full spectrum of human potential. What prejudices have you witnessed or experienced in your own life? Has someone ever underestimated you based on your appearance? Share your story in the comments below. If this message resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge our perspectives and inspire change. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need this reminder about looking beyond appearances. Thank you for watching, and remember that by confronting our biases, we not only lift up others, we elevate our entire society.